In the remote, snow-covered Alps, a doctor and his pregnant wife set off for a weekend getaway, never to be seen again. Their last photo, filled with smiles and excitement, became the haunting final memory of their fateful trip. Despite a massive search effort, the couple vanished without a trace, leaving only unanswered questions. 7 years later, a group of climbers stumbles upon a chilling discovery: their belongings buried in ice. What dark secrets were they running from? And what really happened that night in the mountains? The truth, frozen in time, is about to thaw. Ask ChatGPT. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway, a simple weekend camping trip in the Alps. Dr. William Adler, a well-respected neurologist, and his wife, Lena, an artist, had decided to leave behind the busy noise of their lives for a weekend in the peaceful snow-capped mountains. They had been married for 4 years, and after a turbulent year filled with long work hours, deadlines, and a bustling city life, they were both eager for a breath of fresh air. The moment they set foot in the remote corners of the Alps, it was as if the weight of the world had been lifted from their shoulders. The fresh air, the sound of crunching snow beneath their boots, the crisp cold that nipped at their faces, it was all perfect. They were ready to disconnect. It was their last trip together before William was to start a new high-profile project back home in Zurich. They were full of anticipation and excitement about the future. The day they left, Lena sent a brief text to her sister back home. "We're off to the mountains. Hope to be out of touch for a while. We'll send pics once we settle. Love you." The message was cheerful and optimistic, reflecting their shared excitement. The last photo they sent was of them standing on a ridge, beaming smiles. Lena, with her brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, had on a bright blue jacket that contrasted sharply with the white of the snow. William, with his tall, sturdy frame and short-cropped hair, stood next to her in a dark jacket, his arm around her shoulders, protecting her as the winter wind blew through their hair. Behind them, the towering peaks of the Alps stretched into the sky, almost alien in their enormity, casting long shadows over the snow-covered valley below. The picture looked like something from a postcard, an image of two people in love, embracing the beauty of nature and the tranquility that came with it. But that was the last message they would ever send. The following day, Lena's sister Clara waited eagerly for a call or text from the couple, as they had promised. William and Lena were supposed to check in by noon the next day to confirm that everything was fine. It was a small concession to Clara's anxiety. After all, Lena was only in her mid-30s, but she was already 3 months pregnant, and Clara, being the protective sister she was, worried about her sister's safety in the rugged terrain of the Alps. Still, Lena had reassured her that everything was fine. After all, the couple had rented a camper van, and the weather was calm, clear, with no storms in sight. There was no reason to be concerned, right? But by noon, no word came. Clara tried not to worry, brushing it off as nothing more than a late check-in. After all, Lena and William were probably out exploring or hiking in the picturesque wilderness. She rationalized that Lena might have forgotten to check her phone, or the satellite connection might not have been working properly. The couple had traveled to a more secluded part of the Alps, where the cell signal was spotty at best. But by 3 p.m., there was still no word. Clara called again, this time feeling the knot in her stomach tighten. No answer. She left a voicemail, then tried calling William's phone, but that too went straight to voicemail. It was then that a strange unease settled into her, like an ice-cold hand gripping her heart. By 5 p.m., the hours of silence were beginning to feel suffocating. Clara called again, and again, no response. Desperation started to replace her calm concern. Lena would never ignore her calls. They had a pact, a kind of sisterly understanding. It didn't make sense. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. She thought back to the night before, to that last message. Lena had sent, "Love you." It had felt so innocent, so final. But now, it felt like a goodbye. Clara didn't waste any more time. She called the park rangers, explaining the situation with a quiet urgency. The rangers assured her that they would send someone out to the area where the couple was last seen. It wasn't uncommon for hikers to lose track of time, especially in the winter months when the days were shorter and the terrain challenging. But as the minutes stretched into hours, Clara's concern turned to fear. She contacted William's family, who shared her growing worry. A small search party was immediately organized. The search effort began as dusk settled over the mountains. Searchers combed through the area where Lena and William had set up camp, their bright headlights cutting through the darkness, casting eerie shadows over the snow-covered land. The wind howled in the distance, and the snow underfoot crunched loudly with each step. As they neared the spot the couple had described, the campsite appeared just as they had left it in their photos. The camper van was parked neatly, the lime green tent standing beside it, taut against the wind, and everything seemed untouched. Too untouched. No one was there. No signs of struggle, no signs of life. The campsite was a still, frozen tableau. A chilling reminder that the couple had simply disappeared. They had vanished without a trace. The rangers checked inside the camper van. Everything was in its place, tidy and undisturbed, as if the couple had just stepped out for a short walk. The sleeping bags were neatly rolled up, a kettle on the small stove, and the couple's personal belongings were still in their designated places. No sign of any emergency, no indication of what could have happened to them. It was as if they had evaporated into thin air. By the time the authorities arrived, it was too late to search properly. The night had descended on the Alps, and visibility was almost zero. The only sounds that broke the stillness of the mountain were the muffled voices of the searchers and the whistling wind. When morning came, the investigation began in earnest, but no leads emerged. The weather was harsh, the snowdrifts deep, and the terrain treacherous. Searches continued over the next few days, but there was still no sign of the missing couple. The case was officially labeled a mystery, with no clear evidence or answers. Investigators had no leads to follow, and the search was eventually called off. For weeks, their families and the authorities tried to keep hope alive. Maybe they had gotten lost. Maybe they had found shelter somewhere and just hadn't been able to contact anyone. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope began to fade. The case turned cold. The couple's belongings remained in storage, a camper van, impounded as a part of the investigation, and the questions lingered unanswered. It was a tragedy that didn't make any sense. What had happened to Dr. William Adler and Lena? Were they lost in the snow, victims of a tragic accident? Or had something darker happened? For 7 long years, the case remained open, but with no new information. Family members held on to hope, but they began to wonder if they would ever get answers. 7 years passed since Dr. William Adler and his wife, Lena, vanished into the unforgiving winter of the Alps. For those who had loved them, the pain had dulled into a constant ache, a quiet acceptance that maybe, just maybe, they would never know what happened. The official investigation had been abandoned long ago. The once vibrant case files, filled with hopeful clues and desperate leads, had long since gathered dust in the back corners of the sheriff's office. William's family had tried to keep the search alive, but time eroded their resolve, and the case became another cold file tucked away into the annals of unsolved mysteries. Yet, despite the years and the growing silence, fate had one final act to play in this unfolding tragedy. A twist no one could have foreseen. It all began on a crisp autumn day in 2022, when a group of seasoned climbers, led by Sarah, a veteran hiker known for her daring expeditions in remote wilderness, ventured into a secluded corner of the Alps. The group wasn't following a trail. They weren't hunting for answers. They were simply looking for adventure, the kind of adventure that only the Alps could provide. A jagged and unforgiving landscape, this part of the mountain range was known for its brutal beauty, its towering cliffs and hidden caves. Sarah and her team had explored many parts of the range before, but they had heard rumors of a new section, one that had been largely untouched by human feet for generations. It was a place where nature had kept its secrets well hidden. The thrill of discovery called to them. After several days of navigating through rocky outcroppings, deep crevices, and snow-covered paths, Sarah and her team stumbled upon something unusual. It wasn't just another patch of pristine snow or an untouched trail. It was something more, something unnatural. As they trekked through a narrow pass between two steep rock faces, one of the climbers, Tom, noticed a dark shape protruding from the ice. It looked like an object, partially buried beneath a few feet of compact snow, but it wasn't the kind of shape that nature usually crafted. Sarah, ever the cautious leader, approached with measured steps, her curiosity piqued. The closer she got, the more she realized this was no ordinary find. It wasn't a boulder, a rock formation, or a tree root twisted by the cold. It was something man-made. After clearing away the snow, they unearthed a small section of a metal object. They all assumed it was a piece of discarded hiking gear or some other relic from past expeditions. But as they continued to dig, more and more of the object came into view. A frozen backpack, its fabric tattered and weathered by years of exposure to the harsh conditions. Then another backpack appeared. Sarah's stomach turned. These weren't just any backpacks. They were meticulously packed, as if someone had prepared for a long journey, not just a quick overnight trip. Inside one of the bags, they found a camera, its lens cracked, but the film inside still intact. Beside the camera, there were papers, a medical file, some maps, and a journal. One of the maps had been marked up, detailed with coordinates that seemed almost too specific. They quickly realized that these were not the kind of maps that a casual hiker would carry, but the most chilling discovery came when they checked the identification. The names on the cards were unmistakable. Dr. William Adler and Lena Adler. The names, like a haunting echo, seemed to freeze the air around them. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the camera. With careful hands, she opened the device. The photo that appeared on the screen was of a beautiful snowy landscape, but it was the final image, captured just before their disappearance, that sent a chill through the group. The couple, smiling and carefree, stood together in the snow, the same vibrant backpacks strapped to their backs. Lena's eyes, however, were wide with something else, something unsettling. Her smile didn't quite reach them. And there, in the background, hidden among the rocky cliffs, was something Sarah couldn't quite make out. It was as if something was lurking behind them, an eerie shadow that seemed unnatural. It was a subtle detail, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the photo contained a clue, something left unnoticed for all these years. With the photographs, the journal, and the medical file in hand, Sarah contacted the authorities. Word of the discovery spread quickly, and soon enough, the families of William and Lena Adler were called in to identify the items. For Clara, Lena's sister, it was a gut-wrenching moment. She had long since resigned herself to the belief that her sister was gone, lost forever in the snow. Yet here was something, a piece of the past, a fragment of the future they had, stolen away from her. She could barely breathe as she flipped through the journal. Lena's handwriting was unmistakable, though much of it was cryptic. But one entry stood out. William's obsession is growing. He started researching something. He says it's for the greater good, but I fear it may be something much darker. Clara's hands shook as she read the words. Her sister had Been scared of William's secretive work. But what had it all meant? The investigation reignited, bringing with it a whirlwind of questions. What were William and Lina doing in this remote part of the Alps? Why had they disappeared without a trace? The camera, now revealing a photo of Lina's fearful expression, became a vital piece of the puzzle. The mystery was no longer just a tragedy of two lost souls. Something far more sinister was at play. The authorities began combing through the evidence found with the backpacks. They discovered a medical file belonging to William. It was filled with details of obscure research, neurological studies, pharmaceutical experiments, and obscure references to ancient medical practices. But there were also scribbled notes, calculations, and diagrams that seemed out of place. One of the last things William had been working on, according to the journal, was a controversial treatment for neurological disorders, a treatment that had raised ethical questions within the scientific community. Could William have been involved in something illegal? Was that the reason they had come to this remote place? What had Lena discovered that made her so fearful? And most importantly, why had they both vanished? As investigators delved deeper into the medical files, they realized that the trail didn't end with just William's research. Hidden inside the journal were clues that pointed to a dangerous discovery, something connected to a pharmaceutical conspiracy. The authorities now had reason to believe that the couple had discovered something much darker than a simple camping accident. They hadn't just wandered into a remote corner of the Alps for a romantic getaway. They had been seeking something, and whatever it was, it had led to their disappearance. The more the investigation unfolded, the more questions emerged. The couple wasn't just missing. They had become entangled in a mystery that stretched far beyond their tragic end. And as more secrets came to light, it became clear that William and Lena Adler's disappearance was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous story, one that had remained buried in the ice for 7 long years, waiting to be discovered. As investigators dug deeper into the mystery of William and Lina Adler's disappearance, a chilling new theory began to form. What seemed like an ordinary, albeit tragic, disappearance in the Alps now appeared to be something far more complex, involving hidden secrets, a forbidden research project, and a deadly conspiracy. The discovery of the couple's belongings, including William's medical files and the cryptic journal entries, pointed to something far darker than anyone had expected. The authorities quickly realized that their initial theories, that the couple had gotten lost or met with a tragic accident, no longer fit the evidence. The couple had vanished because they had stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to find. The journal, in particular, painted a disturbing picture of William's obsession with his research. He had been studying neurological disorders, focusing on experimental treatments that were controversial within the medical community. But as Clara, Lena's sister, and the investigators carefully read through the notes, a terrifying pattern emerged. There were mentions of unapproved trials, off-the-record procedures, and unregulated testing, all hinting at illicit experiments far beyond what was acceptable in the medical field. One entry stood out. "Lena is scared. She wants to leave, but I can't stop now. This will change everything." That single line sent a ripple through the investigation. What had William discovered that could be so dangerous? And why was Lena so frightened? In parallel with the examination of the medical files, forensic experts began analyzing the camera found at the campsite. The photo of William and Lina, smiling at the edge of the cliffs, became a crucial piece of the puzzle. But the eerie shadow in the background, which had initially seemed like a mere trick of light, began to take on new meaning. The investigators zoomed in on the image, carefully studying the dark figure lurking just behind them. It wasn't a trick of the light at all. It was a person. Or at least, it looked like one. The shadowy figure appeared to be watching them, motionless, its features indistinct but ominous. Whoever or whatever this was, it was clear they were present when the couple took the photo. Had this person been stalking them? Was this the reason they had disappeared? With this discovery, the investigation shifted focus. What had started as a missing persons case now appeared to be linked to something far more sinister: human experimentation. William's research into neurological disorders, combined with the strange, almost predatory figure in the photo, suggested the couple had been involved in something they had no business uncovering. It was as though they had been drawn to the Alps for a reason beyond a simple hiking trip, and now it was becoming clear that the stakes were higher than anyone had realized. The authorities began to suspect that William's work was not just the product of a lone scientist. There had to be an organization, a company, or perhaps an underground network pulling the strings. The more they investigated, the more they uncovered links to pharmaceutical companies, secretive research labs, and a network of individuals working outside the law. The idea of rogue scientific research, funded by illicit means and hidden in remote locations, began to fit the pieces of the puzzle. Meanwhile, Lena's family struggled to come to terms with the revelation. Clara had always trusted her sister's judgment, but Lena had been frightened, deeply so, of what William was involved in. Yet Lena had been caught in a bind. She loved her husband, and she was pregnant with their first child. Could she have known about his dangerous work and stayed with him, despite the risks? Or had she truly been unaware of the darker side of William's research until it was too late? The journal suggested that Lena was beginning to understand the true danger of their situation, but it was unclear whether she had ever managed to escape the grasp of the sinister forces at play. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that there was a deep web of corruption tied to William's research. The authorities began to follow a trail that led them to a shadowy group of individuals with vested interests in keeping certain scientific advances hidden from the public. It was now clear William and Lena had uncovered something they were never supposed to find. The couple's tragic disappearance was no longer a mere hiking accident. It was a carefully orchestrated cover-up. But who was responsible for silencing them? And why had they chosen such an extreme measure? The deeper the authorities dug into this labyrinth of secrets, the more disturbing the truth seemed. They began to piece together fragments of information about illegal medical trials, unethical experiments on human subjects, and a conspiracy that stretched across multiple countries. William's involvement in these secretive operations, whether willingly or unwittingly, was a key to understanding what had happened to him and Lena. But what was even more unsettling was the realization that the couple's deaths weren't accidental. They had been targeted. The evidence pointed to a carefully planned effort to keep them from exposing the truth, using the remote wilderness of the Alps as a place to bury their secrets forever, not in the quiet isolation of the Alps. Sarah and her team's discovery of the backpacks had set off a chain of events that no one could have anticipated. What started as a curious exploration into the unknown had transformed into the unraveling of a decades-long conspiracy. And as the investigation shifted into full gear, there was only one thing left to uncover: who had orchestrated the deaths of William and Lena Adler, and why? As the pieces fell into place, it became clear that their deaths had not been random or senseless. They had been a warning. Dr. William Adler, a respected neurologist, and his wife, Lena, an artist, set off on what was meant to be a peaceful weekend getaway in the Swiss Alps, hoping to disconnect from the chaos of their busy lives. The couple, married for 4 years, had been working nonstop, and this trip was their final adventure before they would welcome their first child. Lena, 7 months pregnant, and William, a man of routine, were eager for a quiet retreat in the midst of nature. They arrived at a remote part of the Alps, far from the bustling tourist spots, and set up camp with plans to hike through the snowy landscape. They sent a final photo of themselves before setting off. Lena, glowing in a blue jacket, smiled as she sat beside their lime green tent, and William, beaming with joy, knelt protectively beside her. The photo was full of warmth and excitement. Behind them, the grand, rugged mountains loomed as if to promise an unforgettable experience. They followed their plan, sending a text later that day. All set up for the night. The desert is beautiful. Love you. Lena's sister, Clara, replied with a quick message of care, reminding her to stay hydrated. That was the last contact dot by noon the following day. Clara began to worry. She had asked her sister to check in, just to make sure everything was fine, especially considering Lena's pregnancy and the harsh conditions of the Alps. At first, Clara reasoned it away, thinking maybe they had gone on a longer hike or that. The satellite connection was spotty, but as the hours passed without word, her anxiety grew. She tried calling both of their phones, but they went straight to voicemail. She called again. Nothing. By the time the sun began to set, Clara's concerns had turned to dread. Why hadn't they called? Why hadn't they sent a message? Why hadn't they left the mountains and driven to a spot with a better signal? Desperation set in. Clara contacted the local authorities, explaining the situation. A pregnant woman and her husband had gone missing in a remote part of the Alps, their last check-in hours overdue. The park rangers responded swiftly, sending a search party into the area where the couple was supposed to be. They reached the campsite by nightfall, expecting to find the couple or at least some signs of their presence. What they found was eerily still. The tent stood as it had in the photo, the sleeping bags inside untouched, the camper van parked nearby in perfect condition. It looked as though the couple had simply vanished. There was no sign of struggle, no evidence of an accident, no signs that anything had gone wrong. They had disappeared without a trace. The search continued into the following days, but nothing was found. No tracks in the snow, no indication of what could have happened. The couple had seemingly evaporated into thin air. The case grew cold, and with no new leads, the investigation stalled. For years, the mystery lingered. William and Lena Adler had vanished into the mountains, and no one knew why or how.